Hi there, my name is Jennifer Abbott, and I am a filmmaker. I primarily make social justice and environmental feature documentaries. I play many roles. For the film in this year's festival, The Magnitude of All Things, I am the writer, director, editor, sound designer, and co-producer. So to start with, I'd just like to thank KDocs Social Justice Film Festival for screening our film, also for screening our film, The New Corporation, the unfortunately necessary sequel last year, and for inviting me to give this short talk on the subject of seeking truth, waging change. To start with, I want to acknowledge that I live and work on the traditional lands and waters of the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish First Nations. These lands were never ceded and in fact were stolen by the colonial fiction that we call Canada. I also want to acknowledge that these lands and waters were once the home of countless wild, non-human animals who lived here in far greater numbers than they do today, free from human pollutants, noise, guns, control, capture, molestation, and climate change. Their stories are mostly untold and mostly invisible, with the general exception of how they fit narratives of human utility. When I was considering this keynote around my film, The Magnitude of All Things, my reflections drifted often to non-human beings who I consider my kin, and whose stories I've tried to tell in various ways through my work, including in magnitude. In a world of hyper-anthropocentrism, these are quintessentially invisible stories. So I identify as an artist dedicated to filmmaking as craft, philosophy, and activism. The one thread running through and motivating all my work is the desire to make the familiar strange, also called de-reification, exposing social constructs for what they are, in other words, constructed by humans, not God-given or natural, and making things that are invisible visible, or to address this year's festival's theme, seeking truth. Looking back now, I understand I've long harbored a foreboding feeling that the world was deeply troubled. I suspected the society I grew up in was not what it seemed, and somehow I was being deceived. And in fact, looking back at early childhood photographs, even though I had a mostly happy childhood, I mostly refused to smile for the camera. And I sort of understand that now as wanting to have a record of this troubled feeling that I had inside. I've concluded these early suspicions were correct, and it's impossible to fully escape or even understand oppressive power. Now, here I'm not talking about the countless conspiracy theories circulating almost everywhere today, and take your pick. There's so many to choose from, and succumbing to these is the antithesis of ascertaining truth. What I'm talking about is the understanding that the powerful are best situated to perpetuate their wealth, privilege, and outsized influence. And the ways they do so are complex, interconnected, dynamic, and likely impossible to fully understand. These power dynamics intersect with issues of race, class, gender, geographic positionality, whether you're in the global south or the global north, and certainly species. But it's more complex than that. I also believe that there is meaning and value in every attempt that tries to explore, expose, and break down this oppressive power. And like democracy itself, such projects are always aspirational. My art practice and filmmaking have wrestled with these dynamics. Talking about non-human creatures, I am going to just take a quick break to let my dog out. So I'm a storyteller who questions dominant narratives and tries to imagine new narratives to define and give meaning to our lives. To imagine is to engage with the invisible, for the imaginary is not yet material, is not yet manifest, but it could be. And that's where my work intersects with hope, which I would like to address a little later. So my film, The Magnitude of All Things, is a quest to ascertain truth, but in a more nuanced or understated way than my other films. It's about the psychological and emotional dimensions of the climate crisis. Specifically, it tells two parallel narratives: the story of my sister's death and her coming to terms with her deepest fears and sorrows about her own mortality, and our collective reckoning with the difficult emotions of facing the climate catastrophe in our midst. The film, I've come to understand, is an exploration of the ways that grief and hope are inseparable, and that both grief and hope also intersect with truth. So let me just inject a conversation about hope into this discussion, and then we can discuss a little bit more about how grief, hope, and truth all intersect, in my view. So to start with, I'd just like to say that hope can be a form of denial itself. So if you have hope, and if it is in no way substantiated by any empirical truth, and is instead sort of based on what you hope was in a Pollyanna or sort of just a blindly optimistic way, then that kind of hope can actually prevent you from making the kinds of sacrifices that are needed, or taking the kinds of risks that are needed to meet this era, this moment in time, this moment of climate catastrophe. And if you have hope that is also unjustified, you might say, okay, somebody else is going to deal with that, or something else, as in technology, is going to deal with that. I don't have to step up. Sometimes it takes hope to be lost for us to actually take the risks, make the sacrifices, and effectively create change. So I just wanted to discuss a little bit about how hope can be a form of denial. That said, I do believe in the power of hope to create effective change, but that it has to come from an authentic source. And when we are talking about the climate catastrophe, I've reflected a lot about where is it that we can find authentic hope? And for me, it's actually in 3 places. And one of them intersects very, very directly with truth. So let me just address the first 2. Where do we find authentic hope within the climate crisis? Now, one is that the crisis itself is actually scalable. So that means it's not a binary crisis. It's not an either or. It's not like nuclear power, nuclear war rather. With nuclear war, we either press the button or we don't. We either have nuclear war or we don't. With climate catastrophe, it's here. We are trans-apocalyptic. We're in the process of an apocalypse. We're not pre-apocalyptic and we're not post-apocalyptic. So, climate catastrophe is here, but it's not only here in terms of in a black and white way. It didn't just arrive suddenly. It's scalable. We are in the process of either continuing on the trajectory, raising temperatures above pre-industrial levels, or we're in the process of slowly figuring out how to taper these down and hopefully reverse them, and in fact go into negative carbon emissions. So we're on this trajectory, and we don't know where we're going to land. We don't know if we're heading for a 4-degree warmer world, which is uninhabitable, or could we possibly limit things to 1.5? I believe a lot of people think we're too late for that, and likely 2 degrees is baked into the system, but that has not been determined for sure. And I think there is still a slim window of time and opportunity to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, which is really what we have to do. So it's scalable. And even 0.1%, literally, either way, results in the death of the savior of 1 million people estimated, and many billions of non-human animals. So what a tremendous opportunity, and what meaningful lives we live today. It is just such a critical moment in time where our actions, I will say, as a society and in solidarity, working with others, are just so critical and so important to fight a system that is quite literally committing ecocide. So it is a scalable problem, and it is an indeterminate problem, meaning we don't know exactly where we're going to land on that scale. And so, so much has yet to be written. So much history has yet to play itself out. And we don't have a time machine. We don't know exactly what is going to happen. Yes, predictions are bleak. Consensus science is telling us really this is absolute emergency, but we don't yet know, are we as a species going to rise to the occasion? And I should say, are we as a species going to succeed within our different groups and solidarity actions, work together in allyship with those who want to work towards a more compassionate and livable world, fighting against a neoliberal corporate colonial patriarchal capitalism that's benefiting a small elite. So it's scalable, it's indeterminate. But now I want to get to the part of truth that is, or rather part of grief and hope that is related to truth. Because, if we're going to create effective change, we have to tell the truth. Obviously, it's just so obvious, it almost doesn't even warrant saying. However, we've been so good about deceiving ourselves related to the climate catastrophe, so we have to say it. And of course, Greta Thunberg says it often. So to make effective change, to actually challenge the system and create effective change with climate catastrophe, we have to tell the truth. Now, this is where grief comes in, and hope. If we're going to tell the truth, it's going to break our hearts. If we're really going to let it sink in, it's going to break our hearts. It's going to tear us apart. I mean, even if we just look at one dimension of this is ecocide, the 6th mass extinction, So 200 species are going extinct every day, it's predicted. How can we bear that? It's how can we come to terms with it? How can we reconcile with it? These are some of the themes that I explore in The Magnitude of All Things. And I'm not sure we can, but we at least have to start having these conversations, as one of our participants, Ashley Consolo, says in the film. So if we tell the truth, it's going to break our hearts, and we're going to feel grief. So we have to be open to feeling grief, to letting that in, because otherwise we're never going to be able to tell the truth. But that's where all of this intersects with hope, because telling the truth leads to grief, but telling the truth is also the only hope we have to go forward in this crisis, clear-sighted, willing to face our deepest fears and sorrows, but willing to not look away so that we can see what's coming in our direction. And it's only when we are willing to look with honesty and courage to what is coming toward us that we'll be able to create effective change. So I hope that was clear in terms of my thinking of this sort of space that is shared between grief, truth, and hope. Now, I also just want to speak a little bit about Leonard Cohen's song Anthem, and how, to me, that is also really a roadmap to having hope in the era of climate change. Now, everybody always talks about the lines, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. But actually, I really believe it's the two lines preceding those that are important to remember as we go forward. One is ring the bells that still can ring. And let's celebrate what remains. And so much still remains. And so much is so beautiful and joyful and wondrous about humanity, about the non-human beings we share this beautiful planet with. All is not lost, and we must celebrate what is left. And then the next line is forget your perfect offering. Throw away caution, the need for certainty, the need to know the outcome. Don't be paralyzed by thinking you're not good enough or by your own perfectionism. Just step up. So to me, it's those two lines that get us to the light that can come through the cracks. The light doesn't come through the cracks, at least not as, brilliantly, if we stand by passively. So to me, The Magnitude of All Things is a horror story, it's a love story, and it's a ghost story. Many people have expressed to me some trepidation prior to watching the film. It does deal with difficult subjects, cancer and climate change. But I'm really happy to say that so much of the feedback I get from viewers after they've watched the film is that they found the experience of watching the film to be very cathartic and healing. So I hope you experience it that way, and that wherever you are on your journey of coming to terms with the climate crisis, you find in some of the participants or the story a helpful guide to accompany you on your path. So thank you again. Stay safe, stay well, and solidarity. Okay, take care. Thank you.